So with the project having transferred to the kind of solo moniker, do you feel like a Vant persona at all when you're on stage? Is it something that separates yourself from the kind of Vant figure? Or?
In a way, I mean, when I started making this album in particular, I totally intended it on it being a different name, completely different atmosphere. So I actually made an alias for this record that never actually came into fruition because I decided to go ahead and do it as Vant. I think by the time I'd made the songs for the album, made the record, it still felt very much like a Vant project. But I guess in a sense, yeah, there is like an element of stepping out of my comfort zone and portraying a different role this time around.
And you see, like the way that you were kind of thinking of an A-lister and try to do that, was it something like what Bowie does, like kind of coming up with a character to write the songs through, or?
Well, obviously Bowie does do that. That wasn't something that I was consciously thinking of, but it was just a case of, I think it was really important to try and put myself in a completely different headspace, which is something at the time, as I say, it was fully intended to be something different, but I think moving forward, that's kind of the way that I'm going to approach things, is thinking about the type of record that I want to make, and then sort of thinking of, well, if that fictional act existed, like what would they be called, and how would they present themselves, and then applying that sort of methodology to it, but then ultimately it still becomes me and it becomes a Vant record. So it's sort of like trying to go to an extreme, but then bringing it back in so that it makes sense within the walls of the project.
Yeah. So do you see various elements that kind of tie the two together? In that sense, and keep it a Vant record? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that ties it together is my vocals are very much the same, and the lyricism has elements of political and social commentary, which has always been present within the work that I've released so far. So I think that will always be the kind of stream of consciousness, but I think just the other parts around it can be quite fluid and transitional.
Yeah, you mentioned the political kind of side of it. It's kind of an undercurrent that runs through a lot of this stuff you do. Do you think various genres are kind of better at tackling the political side of things, or you're obviously playing a lot of different genres on the new album?
Not at all. I think it's, I mean, I took in a lot of influence from hip hop on this record, and I think for me at the time when we put out the first album, there was only a few voices within rock music that were really kind of touching on those themes, and then obviously there's been a huge surgence of that since we put out that album. But at the time when I was writing and putting out music first time round, the artists that I looked up to were more artists like Kendrick Lamar and Tyler the Creator, and kind of artists that were coming from a different perspective to mine, but also very much socially conscious. So I think that's kind of, it can be anything, you know, it could be country, it could be folk, it could be trance, who knows. You can put whatever theme you want into whatever genre it is that you happen to be into at that moment in time, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned being into like Tyler the Creator and Kendrick, even when you were making the first record. At that point, were you already kind of conscious that you maybe wanted to move away from the garage punk thing and try and do something different with the second one? Or at what point did that idea kind of start coming to the process?
I think I fully believed in what I was doing at the time when I put out Dumb Blood, and it was more a case of, by the time I put that out, I'd been relentlessly making that kind of music for almost 10 years. So it was a case of, there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff, you know, in the build up to being a fully formed artist, that although on the surface it looked like we only existed as a band for 2 or 3 years, the ideology had existed for a long time. So it was a case for me of, I've always been interested in other genres, so I just wanted to kind of try and push my own boundaries and see how far I could push the envelope of what I was able to create.
Yeah. When you took that break away between the two albums and you paused it for a moment, during that period, is that what you were doing? Were you kind of trying to figure out where this album was going to go and what you were going to do with it? Yeah,
it's been a long process. There's a lot of songs that will never see the light of day that have been experimented with over the last 2.5 years, and it has been a total learning curve, because I've not only have I gone from making rock music, it's also been a case of I've produced a lot of this album, so there's a lot more technical stuff that I had to learn. But I think that's kind of why it sort of crosses over quite well, because there's still very much like a punk methodology to it, where I'm approaching things in a way like the first time you pick up an instrument and you just kind of play something loud and fast, and that's what feels honest as like a teenager. But now it's kind of, well, I've never really played synths before, I've never really programmed anything, so it's my sort of slapdash approach to it has kind of given it quite a punky characteristic. So yeah, it's been a long period of adjusting, but I think ultimately it's been for the best, and I kind of have learned a lot and know what I want to do moving forward now.
Had you done any production work before this album? Because you've seen you produced.
Only ever sort of demo stuff. I never really worked things up to a full standard.
How did the early demos of this record then compare to the finished product? I imagine you must have developed quite a lot as a producer over the course of it as well as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I can't take all the credit. There was other producers involved with the process. The guy that mixed and produced the first record, Sam Miller, he was still heavily involved this time round, but it was more a case of, on at least sort of half of the album, of me kind of recording everything individually and then grouping up with him to sort of get the mix right and to do additional production and work it up. So it's been more a case of just actually learning how to make a finished product, or as close as a finished product as you can, and then sort of all the technical stuff I'm still kind of learning. But it's good. It is quite rewarding, because you kind of feel like you can get songs to a much more finished place that sometimes otherwise before I couldn't realize on my own, whereas now I feel like I can kind of get a song almost there without someone else's influence, which is sometimes a good thing as well. But it just it's been at the right moments in this record. Yeah. Whether that's like additional drums or guitar or whatever, just like bits of stuff where I'm incapable of getting that out at the moment. Starting to learn drums now as well. Eventually, I won't need anyone.
How many instruments do you play? What can you do?
I play everything badly. Jack of all instruments, master of literally none.
We've spoken quite a bit as well about how, you know, pushing the album in different directions and experimenting with it, and obviously the creative process behind it was different. But how do you maintain a sense of perspective when you're creating something like this? When it's going in so many directions, how do you know, how far to push it and when to kind of reel it back in a wee bit?
I think the sort of musical aspect of it was a second thought in a sense. It was more an album of trying to write in a different way and focus more on sort of emotional traits and personality, and kind of concentrating on my own place in the world, and more focused on the fact that I just feel quite hopeless at the moment. Like obviously on the first album it was very much like a call to arms, shouting in the face of right-wing power, and I think by the time I got to the end of that process and you had Trump in office and you had Brexit, which is happening very soon, unfortunately, it just sort of left me in a position where I felt like, although I'd shouted about things, what had I actually done to change anything? And that in myself kind of made me very anxious and made me question my position in the world. And so I think it's kind of more been an insular record in terms of trying to understand how you balance life as a person and all the difficulties that comes with that, with the sort of fragility and difficult impossibleness of the world that we currently face. It just feels like you can't change anything, but then on the other side, it just feels like there's a lot of steam building up where it's going to get to a point where enough people are going to be ready to stand up and make a change that something will happen. So I think it's more about learning how to be part of a collective consciousness of positivity rather than feeling like you're isolated in your own world, because I think that's the way that the media and especially social media makes us feel. We do feel very isolated and constantly comparing ourselves to other people, and now it's kind of, I think it's time to try and, you know, get together and actually encourage every positivity that everyone's doing rather than just shouting from your own stand.
Yeah. Do you think that'll be soon? That kind of...
I've got absolutely no idea. I'd love to think it would be, but it doesn't feel like it at the moment. I think, you know, you've got, if you're getting down to the nitty gritty of politics itself, it's going to take a huge radical shift from the left, certainly within the UK, for us to move towards any kind of society that I want to be a part of, I think.
How does music play into that? Do you think music can have a changing role? Do you think it can kind of try and force stuff through, or...?
It has done in the past, you know, if you look at the sort of 60s movement and everything, and how some of those artists like the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and that whole scene were fighting for a greater cause. But again, that was more sort of the additional voice on top of a movement that was already very strong and powerful. I just don't think it's likely that there'll be that much mass communication, possibly ever again, unless like stuff gets really fucking bad, which it might do.
Yeah.
You know, when Brexit sort of hits and we have a huge, even greater economic disparity than we currently face, I think then that might be when you see the sort of lower to lower middle classes kind of going, fuck this, we're not having any more of this, we need to make a real difference. And obviously there's a lot of people that are already feeling the effects of it, but I think, you know, once the picture's a little bit clearer, we're gonna have to face reality.
The tide will start to turn a little bit, hopefully.
I'd like to say yes, I'm trying to stay positive about it, but again, you know, the themes of the record, it just feels like such a difficult situation at the minute. Like, not only have you got the sort of political aspect, but you've also got the environmental aspect. And although more people are switched on and, you know, trying to make a difference in their own small way, I really don't feel like we're going to get to the goals and places that we need to get to in the period that has been recommended by the experts. So it's just, I don't know, it's a really odd time to be alive. We're like in limbo, you know. It's not. You start to see the effects of it, like the sort of wildfires in Australia and everything. But until it starts affecting people in the UK, or certainly within mainland Europe, on a greater scale, I don't think you'll see enough change. There won't be enough people that will make the difference until that is critical, and by that point it might be too late.
Yeah.
Sorry to put a downer on it, but that's just the way I feel.
Yeah, and it's a difficult time to be alive. You mentioned earlier as well about how the record is, you said it's quite insular. Do you think it's more personal in that sense as well than the first one?
Yeah, it definitely is. It's way more about me, and rather than me shouting about the world. It's definitely more about my own position within that whole thing.
Has it gotten easier for you to be like kind of more personal in your songwriting?
Not at all.
No.
There's no way I'm ever writing an album about myself again. It's definitely, you know, at the time when I was putting the first, I guess this is, you know, it's easier said in hindsight, but at the time, the reason that I was so comfortable talking about things outside of my own atmosphere was the fact that it meant that when you perform a song on stage, you're not performing a song that's about you and that is a self-perpetuating cycle of doubt or insecurity. Whereas when you start writing songs about that and you're having to sing them every night or put them out and see people's response to it, it sort of is a dangerous circle where you can end up kind of, if people like it or people respond to it, sort of continuing that and then putting yourself in a deeper spiral and putting yourself in positions, and whether that's, you know, drinking or smoking too much weed or whatever it is, just like kind of feeling like your place in the world is to be the depressed character. And there's definitely been occasions of that over the last 2 or 3 years where I've kind of got in those cycles and played this role that I don't feel comfortable with. And I think for my own mental health, I sort of need to move away from writing about myself and start to write about the bigger picture again, I think.
How do you get out of those situations when you end up feeling like that?
It's just luck. It's just, whether it's having a good conversation with a friend or my partner or my family or whatever it is, you have this moment of clarity that kind of shakes you up and says, well, what the fuck are you doing, Because the last 10 years I've never done that, I did it when I was younger and I had no idea what the fuck I was doing as a teenager, where you feel, as hormonally it's difficult anyway. But then I kind of got to a good place and it was all right, and I realized that, and I'm obviously speaking about my own experience, it's different for everyone, but I think concentrating on your own insecurities and your own inadequacies and things that make you feel bad about yourself is not really a good place to be in. But sometimes the best art comes from that, and I can understand why people do it, and we need it because people who are unable to express themselves in a creative way need those voices to be able to feel better about their place in the world. But I just think for me, I can't do it to myself because I just know that it could eventually lead to something bad,
Yeah. We've spoken about quite kind of the rise of right wing in this interview and quite a lot of negative things.
Sorry about that.
No, it's been one thing was Morrissey, who obviously appears near the end of the album.
Yeah.
Can you separate the art from the artist? I mean, that's a negative character. How do you?
I mean, I think you can. I think, fortunately for me, I've never really been a big fan of Morrissey, so taking a jab at him was not something that I ever felt threatened by. And obviously it is just a tongue-in-cheek punchline rather than it being a total takedown of a character. It's more a comment on the fact that people can change, and sometimes it's not always for the better. And sometimes you spend a career living up to the expectation of things that people have found popular in the past. So in that sense, it was quite autobiographical in a way of like putting an album out that was so completely different to anything that I'd done before, and inevitably feeling like some people were going to have a problem with that. And also there's like, there's a lot said in that short song where there's more and more of my friends now that have been in original bands that are having to look for work in other places like wedding bands or doing session work for other people or writing music for syncs and that sort of thing. And I hope that I never have to go there. I mean, maybe I will, I don't know. But it's sort of that contrast of like, well, where do you draw the line? Where do you separate kind of the thing that you love away from something that is essentially a day job? And then contrasting that with the idea of, well, do you want to make those changes and do you want to sing the Smiths? I don't know, man. It's I can't even remember what you said now. The question was, but
just about Morrissey and can you separate the art from the artist?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, to get back to that point, I think you can. I think it becomes more and more difficult in the climate that we exist in. But, sometimes bad people make great music, so should you wipe someone's entire catalogue out because of who they are as a person 30 years later? Yeah. I don't know. It's a hard one to answer.
I've got one left for you to answer before I let you go and get on the stage. With this album, the first one as well, you're kind of in this position now where you're influencing people with the music that you're creating, and the topics that you choose to speak about are quite important. When you listen to other people, what are you looking to get from their music? are you quite tuned into what they're speaking about in their songwriting, and how does that affect what then you go on to create?
I think I'm always, the music that I like the most is always very lyric based. If it doesn't necessarily have to be about societal issues or politics or whatever, but if I believe what the person is saying and the details are there, where it feels like you're getting someone's opinion in a really simplistic form, then that always excites me. And I do find that quite influential. Certainly, like artists like Kendrick Lamar and stuff have recently been big influence in that respect. But then also, like, you know, I've been getting into more recently artists like Sparklehorse, where it's way more obscure, the lyricism. It's kind of a lot more metaphorical and almost like nonsensical, but the delivery makes you feel like he's touching on something important, even if it might just be a case of random sequences of words. But I think it's more about the delivery and whether I believe the person or not.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Cheers.
No, you're welcome.